Okay, we are live now. So good evening, everyone. Today is 26th of April, and we are going to be starting our fourth and last meeting of this resident engagement panel. So let's start with the item one, which is the apologies for absence and substitutions. I have received one apology from Kieran Reid, who is the Director of Strategy and Engagement. Is there any other apology received?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the item two is any urgent matters. Any urgent matters? I'm not aware of any. Okay, item number three, matters to be considered in private. I'm not aware of any. Item number four, declarations of interest. Is there anyone who wants to make declaration? No, okay. So item number five is the minutes of the previous meetings. So please let me know if there is any discrepancy. Do we agree?
Agree.
Yeah, okay, fine. So let's move on to item number six, communications review. This is the report which will be presented by the Council Officer, Carl Vellum. And just one more note, please mute your mics and switch off your videos unless you have been invited to speak, so that we make sure there is no disruption. So I hand over to Carl. Are you ready, Carl? Have we lost him? Officer? Can you hear me, Carl?
I believe he's just in the chat. He said, Satara, that he can't hear you at the moment.
You can't hear me?
That's best to log off. Yeah, he'll log back in. I think he'll log back in again now.
Okay, but you can hear me all, can you?
I can hear you. I can hear you fine,
that's
actually.
fine.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. Sorry for the interruption. Technology never stops to disappoint us.
But I can hear you fine. Can you hear me fine as well?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. So we're mostly okay, I think. Yeah.
And if Keith wants to make a start while we're waiting for Carl.
Yeah, if Keith wants to join.
Carl's back in now, I think.
Yes, I can see, Chair, I can see Carl's just rejoined. I'll give him a minute to see whether or not he is able to take the item.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, yes. Can you hear?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, I can. I'm really sorry. I completely lost your audio for a moment. I am here and I can hear you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Please present your item.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm presenting the report by Kieran Reid, Director of Strategy and Engagement. This is a report that summarises the communications review that was carried out on behalf of Ealing Council by Darren Cavney from a company called Comms 2.0. Darren's a very highly experienced head of communications within local government and currently does consultancy work right across the sector, and also for organisations such as the Local Government Association. He also runs a number of workshops, training sessions, and has particular skills in things such as social media, video production, and so on. So very much a respected peer amongst the public sector, local government community. So the key focus for the review was to identify what our strategy should be, what our current capabilities should be, and a potential operating model to cover the council's performance effectively over the term of the new administration, which obviously begins in May of this year. He tried to assess our current priorities. He tried to get a handle on how we use data and insight into what we're doing. He looked at capabilities in our media management function, marketing function, design, production, web and digital content. He looked at all of our channels, numerous websites, emails, social media, texting, press releases, the Around Ealing magazine, outdoor and online advertising. And I would add to that the Around Ealing email that goes out to approximately 130,000 email addresses each week. He looked at staffing, how we compare to other local authorities, what our skill sets are. He looked at culture within the team, the culture of communicating within council services, and the expectations and culture within members of the council in terms of communication. He looked at funding. There are a number of complicated funding arrangements within communications where a number of very specific communication functions are funded directly by services and are therefore not available to the whole council. So had some thoughts on what we should do about that. So that was his remit as set out in section 2.1 of the report. His methodology was everything from auditing desktop activity, reviewing what we do, but also Darren spent a lot of time speaking to members, to chief officers, and obviously to members of the communication team, and held a number of workshops with them. So I'd now like to just go through the key findings. I'll go fairly quickly through this. Kieran Reid's report is fairly succinct and summarises things very effectively, but I'll just run through it for the benefit of members. So the key findings were that the report found some very good work being delivered by the team, some excellent content being created. There is considerable skill and experience within the team, but he believed there were internal changes that could be made to allow these skills to flourish and provide a stronger platform from which key strategic campaigns can be delivered. And when he talks about key strategic campaigns, he talks about the three main activities of council communications and council priorities. So I'll work on equalities, I'll work on jobs, and I'll work on environment, which are the three pillars of communication activity within the council, and in fact policy activity within the council. Darren's suggested adopting a campaigns model, taking the objectives of the new administration and the council's priorities, and move to a much more campaigns-based model. Now, this is a fairly loose term in my experience. It can mean anything from a kind of PR agency that will run a campaign to place a product or place an idea within a number of different members of the public, through to a way of organising, I think, behind the scenes. And I think it's the behind the scenes organising that's most appropriate in a local government context. So that would involve lining up services so that there's a coherence amongst officers and managers to deliver coherent thoughts, campaigns, outcomes. And very, very important now that we're engaging with the public in Ealing and all of our partners and people that come to Ealing to visit and do business, and helping to shape campaigns and shape messages. So that's very much, I think, what's meant there by the campaigns model approach. Very important that once the new council is announced in May, now approximately 2 weeks we are away, just over a week away from the council election, probably 2 weeks away from announcing the shape of the cabinet. We will want to create a communication strategy and narrative. The narrative is very simply just the story of Ealing Council and its priorities. Communication strategy is basically saying we have so many choices about what we want to communicate, what our priorities are. Let's prioritize those and let's tell the story very clearly and decide what we want Ealing to be known for as a council and as a place, very importantly as well. Talks a bit about how we align all this with services and then aligning resources to the priorities. As I've said in the introduction, we have a number of posts that are paid for to focus on specific service areas of activity. Darren questions whether that is the most efficient use of resources, of council resources, and some work is ongoing at the moment to discuss the opportunities for bringing some of that resource together so that we can prioritise based on the council strategy, the council communications plan, rather than whoever's got the biggest budget to pay for a specific piece of work. Report talks about training and development, not just within the comms team. And certainly my time here, I've been here just over 6 months now. I've seen some excellent work, and I'm somebody who's worked for more than 10 local authorities in the communications role over the years. I've seen some really excellent work by the team, particularly in the field of video production and social media. And we've been working very, very closely with members of Cabinet to highlight key portfolio priorities and key ambitions of Ealing Council, and producing for my money more output and more content in social media and video production than I've ever seen, I have to say, in any local authority that I've worked with. But all of those skills need training and developing. People move on. Very important that the whole team is skilled up, not just in terms of video production, but other social media content, other channels that are now open to us as a council, as well as the bedrock of what we do, which is excellent writing skills, whether that's for web content, whether that's press releases, whether that's social media content. Writing and now multi-channel production are the key skills of communicators, so we can never get enough training on that. And alongside that, we would want to offer training to the new leadership of the council, the new cabinet, and to officers who ever take up the role where they need to be presenting the council story in public. And there are a number of ways that we can do that. Just to say that the council has accepted the findings of this report. As I mentioned, as we were chatting before this presentation, the advert for the Assistant Director for Communications and Public Relations will be going live this week. The post has been put up a notch from a head of service role, which was the original post, to now an assistant director role, for two reasons. First of all, to increase the remit of the role. The leadership of the council are very keen that we have a much more broader communications remit, that we look at reputation of Ealing beyond the boundaries of the borough, across London, across the country, and with key stakeholders and partners, but also so that we can attract a first-class candidate into this role in what is a extremely ambitious and dynamic council. And the advert for that post is launched this week, as I've said, with the hope that an appointment can be made towards the back end of the summer. So these things normally take 3 to 4 months before somebody's actually in situ. And my role as interim head of communications is to manage the service in the interim. I'll stop there. There are some financial implications. The cost of the review, which again in my experience was extremely good value, and I'll stop there and hand back to you, Chair, for any questions to either myself or my colleague Keith Lewis, who is the Deputy Head of Communications. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for presenting your report. And now I would ask the panel members if they want to ask any questions from the officers, please raise your hands. Okay, first question from Councillor Paul Driscoll.
Thanks, Chair. I think my camera's taken a while to come into focus. I don't know why it's like that. This might help. There we go. Thanks for the report. I wanted to pick up a couple of points. One was the funding element. It's my understanding, I only became aware of this quite recently, that service departments have to, as it were, commission support from comms. So they're actually, much like they would want legal advice, so then they have to commission it. So effectively they are then buying in a service. So then they have to pay for it from their own budgets. I wonder if that report, when it looks at funding, looked at that and how that might inhibit a dialogue and production of information. Because my experience is that some departments can be very reticent to give information out in a timely fashion. It can all be given out in a very substantial, expansive and extensive final report. But in terms of communicating a journey of information that helps to develop a public understanding, that's where I think the council's severely lacking. Great on the final outcome, but when we want to feed information and give part of a story part way through, I think that's where we're severely lacking. And I wonder if that finance model impacts on that. It's interesting to see that some departments have their own Twitter feed, for example, which they then can actually work independently. So I wonder if that's a product also of that funding option, so they can individual staff departments can put out messages without going through comms. So I wonder if that's part of it. If that is the case, if that is part of the funding review, are there any changes proposed to make communications more dynamic and more responsive rather than as a final outcome? So I'll just leave it at that at the moment, but it'd be interesting how that's going to be covered in the report, if it is. Thank you.
Chair, would you like me to respond to that?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Driscoll. Yeah, you make some really excellent points. In my experience working across local government communications, there's a kind of concertina effect that you find that resources get centralised, individual service areas want more than the centre can give them, and so start spending their own budgets to get very niche communications in place. Then the centre has a look around and says, oh, actually we'll take that into the centre because it's much more efficient for all the reasons that you very ably described. And you just continually have this sort of coming and going. I think the stage that we're at in Ealing is a sort of halfway between those two different extremes. We do have a core funded communications service that is not tied to any one particular service area, and that is a quite a small unit, is dealing with literally thousands of different stories, ideas, campaigns, marketing, pieces of press work every year. And we currently are, following this review, we currently are looking to services that have got dedicated communications officers with a view to bringing those resources into the centre so that we maximise efficiency and are able to be much more fleet of foot in a way that you describe. Yes, does that make us more dynamic and responsive, the words that you used? Yes, absolutely. The report found that we probably across the piece, and this includes the service funded communications officers, we're probably about average for London in terms of funding for communications. But are we using our communication resource as a council in the most efficient way? The report suggests that we could be perhaps more effective if we do centralise some of that support. You do have to be a bit careful because There are some services that are very much business focused, so they would see their communications not just as message giving, information giving to customers, but actually a way of drumming up business for the service when they have finance targets. So we do have to bear that in mind, since that's part of the council's overall budget to achieve those targets. But yeah, you make a very good point, and that is certainly something that the review is tasking us with looking at, and is actively being looked at.
Chair, if I may, can I just follow up one point on that? I mean, I'm particularly interested in, are we developing a culture where we provide information on an ongoing basis and we don't necessarily look to that final concluding report as what we publish, but often, especially for large pieces of work, where informing the public at intermediate stages is really important as information becomes known and develops, that we don't wait for that final huge tome of a report. But is there a change in culture? Because I think it's been desperately, sadly missing, especially where we have contentious issues, to inform the public about key points in an issue partway through the journey, rather than at the end. I think we look at the end conclusion rather than the journey that we're passing through. Is that part of that communications report, and is there a change in culture about that? Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can I respond to that? I think. Thank you, Chair. I very much hear what you're saying, Councillor Driscoll. I think the way that local government communications operates is very much a function of the decision-making process, because councils do have these big set-piece decision-making processes, don't they, where they go away, a lot of work is done, a lot of liaison between members and officers happens, a lot of research is done, and then a final report which has the answer to everything is produced in a committee, in a cabinet, in a full council, and so we tend to store up that information until that big moment where the report is published or the decision is taken. I think that's why we behave the way that we do in communications along the way. I do genuinely see, though, that the current administration is very keen to be much more open about decision making, to involve people much more closely. My colleague Keith Lewis has been doing a lot of consultation work, certainly in the 6 months that I've been here, which is about engaging the public. And I think it's a really good challenge to say to us, okay, don't just wait for those big set piece moments and make that the moment that you communicate along the way. And I think that's the challenge that you're giving us. And I think that certainly fits within the ethos of the administration and what they're saying. Making that work will be a challenge, but I think we should rise to that challenge. Thank you for it.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, I'll move on to the next question from Matthew Cullum.
Hi there, can everyone see and hear me okay?
Yes, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, in the report, in-person and face-to-face engagement and communication is rarely mentioned. There's a large focus on digital, which can be very effective, like with ward forums. But to be truly representative, the most vulnerable residents of the borough need the tools and support to be able to engage with those digital platforms. The people that are least likely to be able to use digital platforms are the ones that are most likely to need council services. And quite often they need somebody to explain or interpret council comms to them. They may see something and may read something in one of the magazines or see something on the website, or someone may tell them about something that they've seen communicated by the council. But they may want to be able to speak to someone in person and get that interpreted to them in simple terms that they can understand, pitched appropriately. What sort of, how's that going to be addressed in this report?
I think that, I mean, it's a shame that Kieran is not here, because his remit covers communications, strategy and engagement. And I know that there is a huge amount of work being undertaken to broaden the different pathways in which we engage with people. I think, and I'm not, I hate using this as an excuse, but I think it's possibly a reason this hasn't happened recently, but certainly COVID meant that face-to-face engagement was much more difficult. That's gone. There's absolutely no excuse now. And there is a whole engagement review with Kieran leading it, with people like Joanna Sumner, who's doing a huge amount of work on how do we actually reach different communities, how do we reach people who, as you quite rightly say, have difficulty engaging with us, whether through our traditional channels, through our social media. My media background was in local radio, and we learnt very, very quickly how to create messages that really got through to everybody in the community, and you knew very, very quickly whether that worked or it didn't work. And I think communications job is to try to almost interpret the council for the community, and I don't mean that in a language sense. I mean in terms of making everything plain, simple, easy to understand, easy to engage. So I know that Kieran is working to bring together all those different elements so that engagement, communication, meetings with the public are really, really very effective. I might just pause and bring my colleague Keith in here, if Keith's able to make contribution here. Keith has been leading a lot of the engagement work that we've done around some of the key themes, such as shaping Ealing, such as the work on violence against women and girls, and I quite appreciate Keith sort of offering a view here about some of the engagement work that I know has been happening in the last few months. If that's okay, Chair.
Yeah,
and,
okay. Keith now.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Chair. I think just to respond to the very question, but does that kind of face-to-face engagement feature anywhere in this particular report? I think the answer is no, it doesn't, because that's not traditionally been a function of the communications department. But as Carl's rightly pointed out, on some of the bigger consultation engagement exercises that we're running, we're acutely aware of the importance of marrying up both those digital sort of large-scale engagement approaches with the kind of requirement to do that very direct face-to-face engagement with particular communities, particular groups, and particular audiences. So on projects like Shaping Ealing exercise, we've been working very closely with the community engagement team and with others to ensure that that kind of
We can't hear you, Keith.
Sorry, can you hear me?
It's freezing, yes.
It was getting very
At
choppy.
all.
Maybe turn your camera off, Keith. Loading.
I just have. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you lose all of that from the start, or just some of it?
Well, some
Most of it.
Yeah, most of it.
Start again, Keith.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that will be better.
I'll start again. I'll start right from the very beginning. The question was whether or not this kind of face-to-face engagement was sort of featuring in the report that's been done by Comms 2.0, and the answer is no, because that kind of face-to-face engagement isn't really a function of the communications department as such, which was audited through that approach. But in all the big consultation engagement exercises we are now running, we are ensuring we're working very, very closely with Joanna Sumner's community engagement team to ensure that face-to-face engagement is run alongside the more digital sort of global sort of engagement pieces that we are running. So we do recognise the importance of it, and I think that will increasingly be a feature of the way that we work, so that when we're carrying out the communications around the engagement programmes that we're running, that we work with others across the organisation who have those particular skills in terms of engaging in that more face-to-face sort of way, whether that be through focus groups, community forum groups, or other settings, to ensure that face-to-face and direct engagement, including the offering of translation interpretation facilities, that is a major feature of how we carry out those pieces of work.
Okay, that's good. And do you want to ask another question? No? All right, so let's move on to Councillor Julian Gallant.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much, Paul and Matthew. I actually wanted to speak about those things. What you've asked there, I'm happy about, especially the keeping everyone informed as it's ongoing. Just very quickly, Carl, if I may, the campaigns model. How many campaigns? When are they defined? How many running at the same time? That would seem to me a key thing, organising that and clarifying that at the very earliest stage. The other thing is just a small point. It's actually a phrase I hadn't really come across before, probably because I haven't been a councillor for very long, but 4.11, it says further development of video capacity, audience segmentation and campaign evaluation tools. Audience segmentation is okay as long as it's not sort of separation or obviously the worst of all, segregation. So just a little explanation of that phrase, actually, that would be great.
Thank you, Councillor Gallant. Sorry, just making a note of your questions. Yeah, how many campaigns? Well, that's a very interesting and challenging question, one to which I do not have a definitive answer, other than to say that it is council policy that we organise our workload around the three key themes, which are inequalities, climate and jobs. And my understanding is that those themes will continue into the new administration. So what we've tried to do is, in all of the individual pieces of comms work, whether that comes through the membership or whether that comes through service areas, we've tried to align it with those three key themes. Now, there are a number of sort of subsets of that you would probably consider to be campaigns in themselves. So I'll give a couple of examples. Under the equalities agenda, there has been some very, very careful, considered and excellent work done to consult with women and girls about threats to them on the streets, to map out areas in which women and girls might feel unsafe, and that has launched that communications and engagement work has launched a whole raft of engagement activity. Another one would be the publication of the Race Equality Commission report. Again, that fits within the equalities agenda, but goodness me, that is a whole campaign of work which is currently out there recruiting members of the tribunal to scrutinise the work of the council in delivering on its equalities agenda, and in fact other institutions within Ealing. So within those broad themes, there is potentially an infinite number of other campaigns or strata of work that we can do. You have to be a little bit careful, and I think there's been a huge amount of work delivered in the last year in the run-up to the election. I think with the new administration and its agenda, one of the reasons you need a communications plan or strategy is to prioritise the work and prioritise the campaigns. And I think that plan and strategy follows the delivery of the council plan, which will come out in May at full council, and is built on that and gives everybody across the council, all members, all officers, a very strong idea of what the priorities are and what the direction is. So I can't answer that question in terms of how many campaigns, but certainly in terms of the way that we go about organising those. I think there needs to be quite a rigid process. Audience segmentation. Luckily, I've got a marketing colleague online with me, Keith, who can talk about that. But in broad terms, audience segmentation is just making sure that you're sending the right messages to the right people. But Keith, you may want to add to my superficial response to that question.
Thank you.
I'll only come in very, very briefly to add to that, Chair. I think Carl's really explained it quite succinctly already. It's not about not delivering some things to some people and delivering different things to other people. It's just about ensuring we understand the different audiences that we have across the borough and ensuring that we're using the right channels to make sure we get the right information to everybody. But also obviously using the right language and the right tone for different audiences. So it's not about saying we deliver some things to some people and not others. It's about making sure everyone gets the same message but delivered across the channels that would be most appropriate to their needs and the kind of content that's most appropriate to their needs.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll move on to the next question from Councillor Steed.
Hi, good evening. Can I just confirm, Carl, that the comms budget, I note that there's the new person coming in that is at assistant director level, so presumably that is an increase in budget on salaries. Overall for 22-23, is the comms budget staying stable or is there an increases in the whole budget?
Thank you, Councillor Steed. I believe that there will be a small increase in the communications budget to accommodate the new post that's coming in and to deal with some of the historic income target challenges. I'm very, very happy to ask Kieran Reid to come back to you with an absolute chapter and verse on that if you like. I'll make a note to come back to you with a written answer to that if you like.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I cannot see any more hands, but in the end, I would just like Carl to give us some information on the resident survey that we requested, and we were told that you did not have enough data. So can you please tell something about this to the panel?
Yeah, again, Keith can fill in any gaps that I have. I was not personally involved in the survey, but my understanding from Mr. Reid is that we commissioned a survey as requested by the panel, but the number of responses did not make it a valid survey. That's all I know at this stage. Keith, are you able to add to that?
I think you've articulated the issue already, Carl. The survey, I think, as members of the panel will be aware from previous presentations, was carried out via the council's residents panel route, which is a body of people who volunteered, signed up to participate in engagement exercises. I don't have the exact numbers to hand, but as Carl's already said, the number of responses that came back didn't give us sufficient basis to actually pull together statistics that I think we'd be comfortable presenting at this point in time. Now, whether or not Kieran has an intention to go back out and complete that exercise and boost the sample so that we do have a sufficiently robust sample to base a proper analysis on, I'm unclear at this point in time.
Yeah, if I could add to my colleague Keith's more detailed response. I do know, Chair, that there is an ambition in the new budget for engagement, for strategy and engagement, to conduct a full resident survey. I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the last full resident survey was conducted in 2018. Now, it's quite understandable. Normally these things are conducted every 2 years. 2 years from 2018 would have taken us right into the middle of the pandemic. So I can understand why that hasn't happened. But a full resident survey would be potentially between 1,000 and 2,000 people properly surveyed, either in person or on the phone. It would give us incredible insight into how people are perceiving the council, how they're perceiving services, how they're perceiving different levels of communication, whether we're able to actually engage with people in a form that they appreciate and like. And I think the strategic answer from my point of view certainly would be that it's really important that we are able to find the resources to conduct a full resident survey, which looks at all of the issues that I think you were hoping to get at through the panel, which just has not delivered anything like the results that would be of any use or significance, I'm sorry to say.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Brett, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on that, the resident survey and the fact that we got such a poor response. Do you have a kind of an idea or an inkling as to why that was the case? Is it the way it was communicated? Is it the group of people that were tasked with it? It'd just be interesting to know.
I have to be honest to say I wasn't involved in it. Keith, are you able to respond to Councillor Brett's question?
Yeah, unfortunately, the nature of the panel is that all of the people on the panel would have been sent a copy of the survey and were then very much in the hands of the respondents. It's not like we do a proper sample survey where we go and using the residence panel. It's not like doing a proper sample survey where there's a sort of a much bigger audience and you can keep knocking on doors or making telephone calls to reach the required sample size. Unfortunately, there are, I believe, something in the region of about 1,200 people on the panel, but you're then very much reliant on those people actually coming back and completing the survey.
What was the outcome in the end then? How many people did participate in it?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. My recollection, I'd like Carl, unfortunately, wasn't directly involved with this exercise. My recollection, it was only just over 100 or so responses.
Okay.
Which,
and what would be and what would be the sample size that you would ideally go for?
If we are looking at the kind of the different audiences across the borough, whether we're trying to break that down into different sort of towns, different demographic groups, then quite clearly you need a more significant audience. Once you start breaking 100 odd people down into, even at the kind of the town level, you're then talking about, 30 people from each of the different sort of towns across the borough. I'm not a statistician, unfortunately. I'm not a research expert. I don't think I'd be qualified to give you a 100% answer on that. But normally when we run the residents panel survey, which is a much more structured sample survey, then we're dealing with a sample size in the region of about 1,000 responses. And so to get to that ability to break the data down into all of those subgroups, different demographic groups, I suspect we'd have been hoping to have got a response, several hundred at the very least.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so just let us know, are you planning this resident survey again, given the resources are available, and how soon would that be?
Yes, Chair, I believe that the budget for that is going into the strategy engagement budget for the new financial year. So that money has been earmarked to do this on a proper independent scientific survey that will give us really robust results. I think it's such an important and such a complicated issue. I think it's something that has to be done, you know, in a really professional and detailed way. And I do believe that the budget for that is within the Strategy and Engagement Directorate budget for the new financial year. And I'm sure Mr. Reid can confirm that, but that's my understanding from conversations that we've had with colleagues in engagement who are very, very keen to get back out and do a full resident survey for the borough.
Okay, thank you. The panel hopes that this survey can be conducted ASAP because it's very important that council listens to our residents and all their issues. Okay, so now I don't see any more hands, so let's move on to our item number 7, which is the draft final report of this scrutiny panel and the recommendations. And this report has been circulated to all the panel members. So I'm hoping that you have had time to review that information. And I will be asking panel members if they want to make any comments on these proposed recommendation. So R1, is there any comment for that, R1? R2? Recommendation R3? R4? Sarah, Rooney, you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question and a comment about the around Ealing magazine, but I can wait till we get to that point later.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so we are actually going through all the recommendations. So if you want to make any comment about that particular recommendation, then please come forward. Okay, so R5, are there any comments on that? That covers quite a bit of digital advertising and virtual meetings. No, okay. R6. Okay, Councillor Driscoll.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think it goes back to what I was saying with the previous report about when it says R6B, more contextual information at the earliest possible opportunity. I don't know how, I mean, I think that's partly referencing what I was saying earlier, that we have a culture of great big chunky reports at the end. So we tell the concluding story. And I think that's part of the, as the officers were saying, it's part of the decision-making process. However, if we're about involving and informing and empowering people to make informed decisions, then I don't know how we can try and beef this up a bit, because I think for not every single consultation, but where they are contentious or large-scale consultations, I think that must be a crucial part of the participation, that we're informing people rather than that a concluding part which goes to a committee, that the public are informed as the journey progresses. And I think this intimates about that. So whether that can be beefed up to be more specific about large scale or contentious or some other sort of qualifying characteristic for some consultations, not every single one, but where we have got very controversial ones, I think that's going to be really important that we inform people as they go on that journey. So whether there's a reference there that can improve that focus would be helpful, I think.
Okay, so do you want to add any further comment like point E under the R6 recommendation?
Or whether it's B, I mean, I'm quite happy for you to check Chair's action outside the meeting because it's quite frustrating to edit these in meetings, but whether it's to just qualify B with, I don't know, large scale or controversial issues, contextual information is very important or should be part of the consultation process, whether it's just qualifying that point B would be helpful, I think, just to get a bit of clarity.
Okay, okay, so Julian Gilland, please.
Yes, Paul, that's you're quite right, absolutely right. The idea in that sentence there, I wrote it, we actually worked on that quite a lot, was the idea that precisely, you know, people are informed as we go along. So, but the trouble is, if you start putting in things like on a monthly basis or on a regular, I suppose on a regular basis, or releasing results on a regular basis, that's what you're talking about, is it?
Well, I think it's horses and courses. So
yeah.
Probably for contentious, large-scale issues, I mean, the LTNs come to mind, but there could be others as well.
Yeah.
Especially if they're a long duration timed consultation. Often, and I know information was gleaned and was available at an earlier stage, but didn't come out to the final report. And that's no good in terms of informing people. So rather than saying on a monthly or a whatever, but
yeah.
It's just trying to say we need to make sure that that is a culture shift, and officers need to be aware that actually this is a large scale and it's controversial or whatever it is. We need to provide that information on an ongoing basis rather than a nice chunky glossy decision-making report.
Yeah.
And I think it's about the long-term nature of some consultations or the complexity or controversial nature of some.
Okay.
And be quite frank, some consultations are controversial, and that's fine. But maybe it just needs that referencing, so it's not all consultations. I don't know. I'm quite happy for chair, vice chair action outside of the meeting to sort of tweak or refine that. But I just raised that. Thank you.
Yeah, I got the picture, but we'll I think we can actually include that and adapt that.
Yeah. Okay. So R7. Any comment for R7? Okay. All right. I see hand from Matthew Cullum.
Hi there. Yeah. R7. Well, firstly, it's Ealing together rather than together Ealing, I think. So that's the other way around. The other thing I was going to mention about that was during the Ealing Together programme, from my perspective, within the voluntary sector organisations actually felt valued. And we felt that councillors, decision makers were interested in what we were actually doing, what we could offer and what we could deliver. And during COVID, they got to know us a lot better and what we could provide, what we could bring to the table. But this changes on a regular basis. The charities, the voluntary sector changes constantly. It's very, very fluid due to funding, due to priorities, etc. And it's important that councillors and decision makers keep in touch with the voluntary sector to find out what we're doing on an ongoing basis and to find out what the voluntary sector can provide and what it can deliver. And in this case, who they can engage with on an ongoing basis, not just in a crisis or not just suddenly, oh, we've got this consultation to do, let's suddenly get involved with the voluntary sector. It's important to understand who's out there and who they can reach. And like I say, particularly when it comes to engaging with hard to reach communities that are in Ealing.
Thank you. I mean, look, in all these three meetings, we have had a good conversation and debate. And today what we are doing is going through all these recommendations and what the panel thinks about it. Okay, so let's move on to R8. Any comment on that? Okay. All right, number 9, R9. Any comment on R9 recommendation? No. Okay. R10. Don't see any hands. Okay, the last one is R11. I think Councillor Rooney wanted to ask a question or maybe make a comment.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies if I missed this information in the previous meeting, but I know with the Around Ealing magazine, I think it's brilliant that we keep a hard copy of the magazine. Just wondered what the cost implications of this would be, because I know there's been discussions in the past about whether it would save the council money if it's just available online. However, so it's just a quick question about that. Thank you.
Okay, I think the officers, maybe they want to give this information.
Yes, Chair. Can you hear me or
Yes.
see me?
Yeah.
Can't see myself at the moment. There we go. Yeah, there absolutely is a budget line. It's published in the annual budget. We're currently trying to get a fourth edition of Around Dealing magazine out through advertising, summer edition based on using advertising for all the events that have flooded back into the borough. We think we can put some funding towards that. I have to be totally honest, unless my colleague Keith Lewis can pull the figure out of thin air. I don't have the number to hand. All I know is that it's very, very good value for money. Compared to other council magazines that I've worked on, Ealing's budget for its magazine is very, very small, and as members have said, and as I believe very, very strongly, for all the reasons of inclusion and I think specialness, now that actually getting a physical copy of something has a special significance in the age where everything else is delivered electronically. I would really celebrate the fact that Ealing has maintained its physical copy of its magazine when some other boroughs have ditched theirs. So I think it's to Ealing's great credit that it has maintained that. I noticed while I've been talking that Mr. Lewis has his hand up and may be able to furnish members with an answer to the budget question. Keith.
It is a number I'm very familiar with. The net cost per edition of Around Ealing, which includes design, print and distribution and paper costs, obviously, traditionally has been circa £18,000 per edition. That's after the incoming revenue from external advertising is taken into account. What we are, however, finding at the moment, in line with rising costs of a number of things, in particular, the cost of paper is starting to creep upwards. Some of our distribution, some of our print costs are starting to creep upwards. So I suspect that in the next financial year, we'll be looking at near a net cost of close to £20,000 for a standard edition of the magazine, but it's certainly in that ballpark, somewhere between £18,000 and £20,000 per magazine, which, as Carl said, still represents excellent value for money. Bearing in mind we are distributing something in the region of about 140,000 copies of the magazine with every edition.
Thank you both very much, and I completely agree that it's good value for money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, so we have actually concluded our meeting, which is
Chair.
Yes, go on.
So sorry, before you go into your concluding.
Yes.
I don't want to sully your parade there, but just while we're on the recommendations, I've had various correspondence recently about sort of the validity of consultations and the option of what seems now known as gaming. So multiple applications, multiple comments from same individuals or organised groups. And I think it undermines the confidence of the public in consultations. And I think the council needs to address this. So in its methodology for consultations, again, especially where they're controversial or potentially possibly unpopular, whatever it might be, that the methodology is clear and robust enough so that gaming by whatever group, organisations, individuals, whoever it is, can be assured to those participating that they're not going to be swamped by multiple submissions which are just duplicates. I think it's something about today's age, how technology is used inappropriately in many cases, but I think officers need to take on board that this undermines the confidence on whichever side of an argument you might be on or discussion for a consultation. So I think it's a real issue that we need so we can continue to have public can have confidence in the consultations, that they're true, they're valid, they're representative. And I think that needs to be built into some of the larger scale consultations, and officers need to have that a robust answer and structure already in place.
Okay.
So I mean, I'd suggest that, mainly because I've had lots of correspondence about that recently, so it seems appropriate to include it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, fine. So we have reviewed all the recommendations by this.
Sorry, can I just just one quick point? I have put in the chat for you, for Paul, regarding R6B. Did you have a look at that and see if you were happy with that phrase?
Just so for the meeting, so everybody who might be viewing, because the chat is not public, but it just says Councillor Gallant very kindly put into the chat a suggestion, which was to provide information, especially with regard to contentious issues, at the earliest possible opportunity and at regular subsequent intervals. Fine, great. I think it addresses all the points.
Definitely, yeah, especially when contentious issues like planning applications and parking. Yeah, so that's important.
And Chair, can the suggestion of R12 about gaming, or however it's drafted appropriately, be considered? So the methodology is robust or understood, or officers prepare for that, so that public competence can be maintained in consultations. I think it's the nature of the beast in today's age that we should be prepared to answer those questions and be prepared to have consultations which can be robust enough to deal with gaming from whichever party or individual or group or whatever it is.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution and comments. Okay, so we are actually at the end of this meeting, and now I have come to the stage where with a heavy heart, I have to say goodbye to all the panel members. This is a very emotional moment for myself. And I want to wholeheartedly thank all the officers, panel members, co-optees, and all the expert witnesses involved in this resident engagement panel, and our very hardworking democratic officer, Harjeet Bains. Without her help, this panel would not have been able to operate so smoothly. It has been a pleasure to work everybody, and we have had some really, really good discussions and debates, and being able to make these recommendations and going forward. And I wish well to all the panel members who are standing. And as a panel members, I mean, our job is to make recommendations, and then it is up to the executives and the portfolio holder to decide how they want to implement going forward, and how feasible they are for the council to implement them. So that is my conclusion and my final remarks. So if anybody else wants to say something, that's your moment. Councillor Mahmood, your mic is off. You are muted.
Sorry, Councillor Anjum, just wanted to say on the behalf of my colleague, you were an excellent chair, and we had a very productive scrutiny review panel. And I must say thank you so much for all the work you have done for this committee and all the work you have done during your membership in the council. We are very thankful to you and your contribution, and I wish you all the best for your future and whatever you are doing it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Mahmood, very kind of you. Before we leave, just quickly ask the panel members, I mean, if there is any scrutiny panel that you want to suggest for 2022 and 23, I mean, you can suggest now, you can email the officers, whichever way you think is appropriate and convenient for you. Okay. So I would say everybody a very, very good evening. Before I leave, I wanted to ask if there is any other comment from any other panel member. No?
I'd
Okay.
also like to thank Councillor Andrew for chairing it, and especially as I've been a councillor for a very short period of time, and I've been much enjoyed working with you and producing what I think are some very useful conclusions. And I
Thank
wish you the
you,
very
Councillor
best.
Gallant. It has been a pleasure to work with you. And I say good night to all the panel members. Look after yourself. Thank you very much.
Good night. Thank
Right.
you.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Chair.
you, Chair. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you and good night.